Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. Today we're going to try to, we're going to dive deep into a very complicated custody case, Bethany Gould's story. And, our listeners have sent over a bunch of articles and different research, so we have a lot to cover.
Yeah, we do.
But I guess let's just get started with what we have.
Well, I think one of the things that really struck me right away is just the emotional weight of this story.
Yeah.
It's we're talking about a mother separated from her child,
Right.
accusations of abduction, and this, really unsettling possibility that the system that's designed to protect families
Right.
is being manipulated against them.
Yeah, and that powerlessness
Yeah.
really comes through. I mean, in Bethany's account, she talks about how she just wanted to do something very simple.
Right.
In 2019, she decided to pursue child support from Brielle's biological father, Travis Moss,
Okay.
just to ensure financial stability for her daughter. And she even mentions her willingness to co-parent and facilitate positive interactions between Brielle and Travis.
And that's, what makes everything that happened after that just seem so much more jarring.
Yeah.
Because according to Travis, after a period of what seemed like amicable interactions,
Right.
filed for custody of Brielle in Virginia.
Right.
But Bethany and the children were living in Alabama.
Right. So it's a jurisdictional.
It's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
And it immediately begs the question, was this a genuine attempt at co-parenting, or was this some sort of calculated move to exploit these legal loopholes?
Yeah, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, really. If what Bethany's saying is true, it paints a very disturbing picture. She talks about a false protection order that was filed against her, delaying Brielle's return to Alabama, and then ultimately this temporary custody order that was obtained in her absence.
Oh, wow.
And she says she was shut out of all communication.
Oh, my gosh.
So it really suggests that there was a deliberate effort to isolate her from her daughter.
It really does sound like that. And it's important to keep in mind that, we're looking at this from Bethany's perspective.
Right, of course.
A court of law would, of course, need to consider our sides.
Right.
But I think her experience really highlights this crucial issue, which is the potential for abuse within the family court system.
Right.
These false allegations, the procedural inconsistencies, the complexities of interstate custody disputes.
Yeah.
They can create this legal labyrinth that's just incredibly difficult to navigate.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially for someone without adequate legal representation.
Yeah, and then you bring in law enforcement.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
And it gets really complicated. So there's this incident on November 14th, 2022.
Okay.
Bethany describes police officers in Ginn, Alabama, removing Brielle from her care. And they were allegedly in communication with Travis and his attorney.
During this?
Yeah, and she says it wasn't, a quiet handover or anything. She talks about her daughter clinging to her.
Oh, my God.
Her other daughters protesting.
Wow.
It was a scene of just chaos and distress.
That's just awful. That's awful. And this incident really, raises these critical questions about what is the role of law enforcement in these custody disputes, especially when you have these out-of-state orders. While police officers, they're obligated to enforce court orders, their actions should always prioritize the well-being of the child.
Of course.
So you have to ask, in Bethany's case, were the officers adequately informed about what was going on?
Yeah.
Did they, really assess the situation properly before they removed this child who was very clearly distressed?
Right. And what about the impact on the other children?
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Brielle's sisters, Ava and Deja, Bethany talks about how they witnessed their sister being taken away by police.
Oh, wow.
And the fear and the confusion that they felt, the helplessness.
That's got to be so traumatic.
Bethany describes their lingering anxieties, the emotional toll that this has taken on their young lives.
Yeah.
And it just raises this question of are we really considering the voices and the emotional well-being of the children?
Right. Are we really putting them first?
In these really difficult custody battles.
It's so heartbreaking. We often get so caught up in the legal part of it all, but we forget that these are real families with real children whose lives are just totally turned upside down by these decisions that adults are making, or in some cases not making.
Right. And then, Bethany's story takes another turn when she describes Brielle's behavior after visits with her father.
Okay.
She talks about shiny discomfort with her own body withdrawal. And these weren't things that she had noticed before.
That's really concerning.
Yeah. And while, it does need further investigation, it raises concerns about potential parental alienation.
And that's a serious issue. Parental alienation is a form of emotional abuse that can have really long-lasting consequences for a child.
Yeah.
It impacts their emotional and psychological development. And it's when one parent intentionally manipulates a child's perception of the other parent, and often with the goal of damaging that relationship. So, while we don't want to jump to conclusions, Bethany's observations really do warrant careful consideration.
Yeah, and that's where the limitations of the legal system become even more apparent.
Right.
Because proving this in court, proving parental alienation can be incredibly difficult.
Especially when it's this kind of subtle emotional manipulation rather than, some kind of overt abuse.
Right. And Bethany talks about how she later found out about communication between Travis and his attorney and Officer Snow. And it had all been leading up to Brielle's removal.
Wow.
And it's like, if she had had access to that information at the time, it might have really changed things.
That's a good point. It just highlights how important it is to document everything.
Yes.
If you're going through something like this, keep detailed records of everything, emails, text messages, phone calls, any concerning incidents, any changes in your child's behavior.
Right.
That information can be crucial in building a strong case.
Yeah.
And making sure that your child's voice is heard.
That's such a good point. And it must be so hard because you're already going through so much.
Right.
And to have to be thinking about, building this case.
I know.
It's just a lot.
It is, but it's so important.
Right.
And, the other thing is get legal counsel.
Right.
Right away, a qualified attorney who specializes in family law can help you understand your rights, navigate the system, advocate for your child.
Right.
Don't try to go it alone.
No, it's too much.
It's too much.
Yeah, the Bethany story just shows how long and how hard this fight can be.
Yeah.
The fight for your child's safety and well-being.
Yeah.
It's a story of resilience and determination and a mother's unwavering love. But it also brings up these really uncomfortable questions.
Yes, it does.
About, the systems that are supposed to be safeguarding our families and how they can be manipulated or fail the very people they're supposed to be protecting.
Yeah, it's a really tough situation for sure.
So we have a lot more to discuss.
Me too.
But we're going to take a break.
Okay.
And we'll be back in a few minutes.
Sounds good. This case really just underscores how important it is to be aware of parental alienation. It's a form of emotional abuse, and it can have devastating long-term effects on children.
Right.
And it often goes unnoticed.
You're so right. And it's a very complex issue.
Yeah.
Incredibly challenging to prove in court. But, when Bethany's talking about Brielle's behavior after the visits with her father.
Right.
It's concerning the shyness, the discomfort with her own body.
Yeah.
The withdrawal
Yeah.
that she hadn't exhibited before.
Right. Those are all red flags.
Yeah.
You really have to pay attention to those little changes in a child's behavior.
Right.
Because they're not always able to articulate what's happening.
Right. Especially if they're being manipulated.
Exactly.
So if a parent suspects that this is happening, what steps can they take? What kind of evidence is going to be compelling in court?
Well, documentation is key,
Okay.
like we were saying before.
Right.
You have to keep very detailed records, visitation schedules, any concerning incidents, changes in the child's behavior,
Right.
all communication with the other parent.
Right.
That's all really important stuff.
So it's like you're building a case.
It is. It's kind of like building a case. Yeah.
But it's sad that, instead of focusing on your child, you have to be thinking about, gathering evidence.
It's a tough situation.
Yeah.
But it's so important because proving this in court can be really, really hard.
Right. Yeah. And then, Bethany's story also highlights the role of law enforcement.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that incident where the officers removed Brielle from her care,
right,
despite her being so visibly upset, it's really concerning.
It is. And police officers are obligated to enforce these court orders.
Right.
But they also have a responsibility to make sure everyone is safe, especially the child.
Right. So how do we find that balance?
Well, I think training is really important.
Okay.
Law enforcement officers need to have really thorough training on domestic violence, child abuse, parental alienation.
Right.
They need to know how to recognize the signs,
right,
how to assess the situation accurately, and understand how manipulation can play play into these disputes.
Yeah, because it's not enough to just show up and enforce an order.
Exactly.
You have to understand the context, the potential impact.
It's about the big picture, you know?
Right. And I think there also needs to be better communication.
Oh, absolutely.
Between law enforcement, the courts, child protection agencies.
100%.
So it's like a more holistic approach.
Exactly.
Where everyone's working together. To make sure the child is really being put first.
The child's well-being would be the top priority.
Yeah, the Bethany's case, you know, with the police interaction and then the jail time that she faced.
Right.
It really brings to light how much needs to change. I mean, the emotional toll on her and her daughters.
Oh, it's huge.
It's just immense.
It's just so sad, and it really shows the challenges that so many parents face, especially mothers in the family court system.
Yeah, it's like we need to look beyond the legal stuff and consider the human impact.
Absolutely.
What I find really troubling is that Brielle was so clearly distressed during that police interaction. But the system seemed to care more about enforcing that order than her emotional well-being.
And that speaks to this need for a more nuanced approach, one that takes the child's perspective into account. Enforcing a court order should never come at the expense of a child's well-being.
Absolutely not. So how do we give children a stronger voice in all of this?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
You know, there's no easy answer. But I think one thing we could do is appoint qualified child advocates, guardians ad litem, who can actually represent the child's best interests independently of the parents' legal teams.
Right, so they're not, you know, caught in the middle.
Exactly. It's about shifting the focus away from this adversarial kind of win-lose mentality and towards something that's more child-centered, that prioritizes their well-being.
Yeah. And we can't forget the emotional side of all this.
Of course so.
I mean, what Bethany has been through.
It's heartbreaking.
Separated from her daughter.
Yeah.
Then the jail time.
It's a lot.
It really shows how much these legal battles can affect families.
The fear, the anxiety, the helplessness.
Yeah.
It's a heavy burden.
And Bethany's other daughters, Ava and Deja. They witnessed their sister being taken away.
Yeah.
And now they're living with all this fear and uncertainty.
Of course.
It's just, you know, their family has been torn apart.
Right. And that's why it's so important to provide support and resources for all the children. They need a safe space to deal with their emotions, to understand what's happening, and to have their voices heard.
Yeah, we really have to do better at recognizing and addressing their needs.
Absolutely.
Their well-being should be at the forefront of all of this.
100%. We need to move away from this, you know, adversarial wing-lows thing and be more compassionate.
Right.
Put the child first.
Yeah, Bethany's story is a good reminder that, you know, behind all the legal stuff, there are real people.
Yeah.
Real families.
Real children.
And real children whose lives are deeply affected by all of this.
It's a call to action for all of us to fight for a better system, a more compassionate system, one that actually protects the best interests of the child.
This deep dive into Bethany's story has been really illuminating.
Yeah.
But it's also left us with even more questions.
It always does, you know, when you start digging into these complex social issues.
Right.
But I think by asking these questions, by shining a light on these experiences, we can start to have more meaningful conversations about the systems that are supposed to be protecting our children and figure out how to make them better. Yeah, it really makes you think, you know, what can we do to prevent things like this from happening again?
It does feel like $1 million question.
It is, yeah.
But I think you're right. We have to start by recognizing that the system right now, it just doesn't prioritize the child's emotional well-being.
Right. It's more about following the letter of the law.
The legal process.
Yeah.
So how do we change that? What can we actually do?
Well, one thing we can do is make sure law enforcement officers have better training on things like custody disputes, parental alienation, how to recognize when a child is in distress.
Right.
You know, they need to be able to really assess these situations with more sensitivity, and the child's safety has to come first.
Yeah. And what about the courts?
Oh, yeah. The courts definitely need to be part of this.
How can we make sure that the judges are equipped to handle these cases?
Well, I think we need judges who specialize in family court.
Okay.
Judges who understand child psychology, parental alienation, all those nuances. And I think we also need to make sure that child advocates or guardian ad litem are appointed.
Yeah, to represent the child.
To represent the child, exactly.
That feels so important.
It is.
To give them a voice in all of this.
Yeah, because we need to move away from this. It's my way or the highway kind of thing.
Right.
This win-lose mentality. We need to be more collaborative and focus on what's best for the child.
Bethany's story with everything she went through.
Yeah.
The police interaction, the jail time, the emotional toll on everyone.
It's a wake-up call.
It is.
It shows that we really need to do better.
We need to make changes.
Big changes.
We have to protect these children and support families.
Absolutely.
And make sure that justice is actually being served.
Yeah.
Well, this deep dive has been tough.
It has.